Welcome to the Millennial Money Canada podcast, a podcast to elevate your financial planning literacy so that you can live well, build wealth, give generously, and leave a legacy that you're proud of. I'm Guillaume Girard, financial planner, and I'm joined by Sam Lichtman, founder and financial planner at Millennial Wealth Advisors. And for this episode of the Millennial Money Canada podcast, we're doing a deep dive on RRSP versus TFSA. And a few reasons, mostly because it is topical, given that a lot of people will need to make that decision, which account should they fund first in the first 60 days of 2025. But also just even in the gym, people have come up to me, okay, what should I do? Should I prioritize the RSP? Should I prioritize the TFSA? So given that where we're at in the season, I think it would be very topical to break down all the information around these accounts, what they are, how they work, which one should you prioritize, how do you decide what are the pitfalls and the mistakes that people make using those accounts, the differences if you're an employee versus a business owner, how you should treat those accounts. So we'll cover that a little bit. But before we dive to the episode, Sam, do you want to give the listeners an update on the business overview, business outreaches through your technical initiatives?
Yeah. It's been an interesting last few weeks. We're starting to see, as many of the listeners may know, we're a millennial-oriented firm, whereas we use a lot of technology. We do touch points virtually with our clients. And I found that in my parents' generation, the baby boomer generation, they definitely appreciate a lot more of the face-to-face. But recently, we're seeing more of the baby boom generation actually reach out to us and ask for help on retirement and estate planning. And many of these people reach out to us twofold. One, because they feel that we can actually help them on the decumulation stage of their life planning, which we do have a lot of expertise in that, even though primarily we work with people in the accumulation stage. But also because they know that if anything were to happen to them, their adult children would be in good hands if they were to inherit the parents' money. And so often what I'm finding, so with existing clients and new prospective clients, recently especially, is just that conversation around generational wealth planning and how we're building out the retirement plans now to include what happens if we pass away early, how are things structured, how do you want the money to pass on to your next generation. A lot of the people that we talk to prefer to, what we call it in our industry, give with a warm hand rather than a cold hand. So if they know that, hey, we've got assets to last us till retirement or till life expectancy and then some, we would like to start giving money to our kids or grandkids earlier. A lot of that planning has been initiated by us, something that wasn't really thought about on the client's perspective before, but also they've been very grateful for that, because now they feel like not only are we set up, but our kids are set up as well. And if anything happens to us, they're not going to go and be irresponsible with the money. They've got good financial planners set up to help them with that. And that's been a super cool experience to see. We've joked recently, like we work with millennials and their parents. But realistically, when I first started in the industry in 2016, I was dealing with a lot of people who were retirees or pre-retirees and wanting to plan for that retirement stage. And now, having had that expertise built up in that stage, even though our primary audience is millennials, we do find a lot of people in the pre-retirement or retirement stage coming to us to say, hey, like my kids are millennials or Gen Z, and I need to make sure, I haven't really gotten good financial advice around my situation. I would love to get set up with you guys so that my kids, if something happens to us, can inherit the assets and have it managed in a good way. And so that's been a really cool experience that we've seen happening more recently.
Yeah. And if my takeaways of the last few meetings that we've had were around the focus on investment planning that the older generation mostly were focused on. So they work with a firm, whether it's a private investment counsel firm or an independent investment arm, where they would solely focus on the investment side of things and little to no planning. And now I feel that people in that generation now are realizing the importance and the need to plan, and something that had been lacking throughout their financial journey. And I think that's something that they're realizing that they need. And of course, having advisors that will be around while they're lasting during their retirement, they're probably also thinking, well, he's still going to be in his profession while I'm retired. So it's not like he's going to be retiring in a year or two. So maybe that's playing out as well. But it's just interesting to me when I see people in that cohort reaching out, especially from the fact that you're posting on TikTok. We always think that in TikTok is, 18 to 22 years old, just scrolling mindlessly. And no, you actually have people who, are looking for valuable advice on that platform and reaching out. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you look at the demographics on social media and definitely it skews younger, but some of the largest growing demographics have been people over the age of 40 on all social media platforms. So when you look at percentage year-over-year growth on platforms, in the older generations, they often take a little bit longer to join new platforms, but they often join it. And when they do, they grow very, very quickly in terms of the amount of people that join it. So I even look at the analytics on my videos, like who's viewed it, what age demographic are they in, all of that stuff. We find that for me, ages 35 to 44 are the highest views. So the second highest views are 25 to 34, and the third highest views are 45 plus. And so in that aspect, and it's not very far behind the 25 to 34. It's within like 2 percentage points of the people that view those videos. So it's very fascinating to see, like, yes, the older demographics, they absolutely are on these platforms and they are listening and likely to reach out if we talk about things that are affecting them, which I guess I've been doing lately.
Nice. Great job. Talking about advice or videos with content that is relevant to them. Today, we said we're going to talk about at length around the RRSP versus TFSA. So first of all, the Registered Retirement Savings Plan. It was introduced in 1957. And what is an RRSP and how does an RRSP work? Well, an RRSP is an account, is a type of account. And you hear that sometimes is, oh, what are your RRSP returns? Well, your RRSP or your TFSA returns. So these are types of accounts where you put your money in. But once the money is in the account, then you need to invest it. And this is going to be for a later video. But some people, it's important to make a clear distinction here. So once you deposit money into your RRSP account, it will reduce your taxable income today, while the investment growth in the account is going to be tax deferred. It's not tax free, it's tax deferred. So that when you get to retirement, or if you have to withdraw money before retirement, you will be taxed at that point in time.
Yeah. I think it's funny because I think I want to have a conversation around the tax free versus tax deferred in an RRSP. I'm sure.
So the tax rate here is really important. When you're contributing into your RRSP today, what is your tax rate? And then what's going to be your tax rate at retirement? And I want to share with you what is the difference between a marginal and an average tax rate. So we'll do a quick summary or explanation about how taxes work in Canada. Let me share my screen.
That's interesting. I haven't dove back into things pre-1957 when the RRSP was created. But essentially, I guess before that, Canadians' options were pretty limited in terms of registered plan contributions and options they had to defer tax long term. So it's interesting to see, and the uptake on it has obviously been huge for RSPs and since 2009 TFSAs as well.
Yeah. So what? I guess I should do more research on this. But what was it before 1950? Was there any tax deferred?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'd have to look into that. I mean, obviously, it wouldn't be super relevant to today's audience, but
I'm just curious.
Yeah. Like, well, even the tax rates were so different back then too. Retirement age, like the concept of a retirement age kind of came around in, I think, the 50s and 60s post World War II, where people were like, hey, I want to stop working at a certain period of time, but then life expectancy was also much shorter. So we're like, retirements were only like 7 years on average. So there was a lot shorter time frame to fund or to actually deplete wealth over that period of time. So yeah, just completely different dynamics. But yeah, it's interesting, the marginal and average tax rates here, like where you contribute and what do you actually pay tax on. A lot of people are confused about this, so I'm excited to go through this.
Yeah, exactly. Just for the simplicity here, we'll just assume that your first $49,000 is taxed in British Columbia at a what we call marginal tax rate of 20.06%.
Is that combined? That's combined federal and provincial?
Exactly. So for simplicity as well, I just combine the federal tax and the provincial tax. So depending on your provinces, your marginal tax rates will slightly differ depending on the provincial tax rates. And then your first $49,000 is taxed at 20%. Then from 49 to 57, you'll be taxed at 22.7%. Then from 57 to 98, 1,500, you'll be taxed at 28%. So as you see, each bracket is being taxed progressively at a higher and higher tax rate. That's what it's called, the marginal tax rate. And why this is important is because when you're making an RRSP contribution, it reduces your total taxable income for the year and most likely will bring you maybe in a lower tax bracket. And that's how you're going to have it tax savings today.
So basically, if I'm in the tax bracket of 31% federally and provincially, let's say I make $110,000. So assuming no other deductions, I would have to make about $440 contribution to my RRSP in order to drop down into the lower tax bracket. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So in that sense, then what actually ends up happening is, and we can explain this later because there's a lot of confusion around marginal tax rates where people think that they bump into a higher marginal tax rate. So now they actually earn less money because they get taxed higher. But maybe if you could explain how they only get taxed on the excess portion that they earn.
Yeah, exactly. I think the takeaway from sharing this table and explaining you the difference between marginal and average is because a lot of people are thinking, oh my God, I'm being taxed at 35%, 40%. But that's your marginal tax rate. That's your new dollars that you're earning. Because once you're blending each bracket based on the tax rates for each different brackets, your average tax rate is a lot lower than we think, which is a positive thing. I know people who they don't like to pay taxes and they think that taxes are extremely high. And I'm not here to be political, whether taxes should be lower or higher. I'm just saying that people are actually paying less taxes than they think they are on a percentage basis. That's the takeaway of here. So when you look at the average, it's going to be, a lot lower. So someone in that range bracket that you mentioned, who's making, $10,000 or so, or in that bracket, will have an average tax rate of 24, even though their marginal tax rate is 31%. So,
yeah. So basically, that's $27,000 in taxes owed, right? And I know you're not here to be political and say taxes are too high, but I'm happy to do it. I think taxes are too high. But that's okay. We can just save that discussion for another podcast.
Yeah. So in terms of how that's deducting you're reducing your taxable income or giving you a tax refund, then that's where you want to look at your marginal tax rate and you want to multiply your marginal tax rate times the contribution you're making into your RSP, and that will give you your tax refund. Yeah, that's so if you deposit $10,000 into an RSP and you're in a 31% tax bracket, then you can expect to have a tax refund of $3,100 after you file your taxes.
Yeah, and that's important to know too, because sometimes if you're in that 31% tax bracket and you make let's say a $20,000 RSP contribution and $10,000 is refunded, let's say you're like $10,000 above that lower tax bracket, then $10,000 will be refunded to you at the 31% tax bracket and $10,000 will be refunded to you at the 28% tax bracket. So it'll be $3,100 refund on the first 10 and then $2,800 on the second 10, right? So that's important to understand as well. And I think one area that Canadians don't know about necessarily is that they don't have to claim their RSP contributions in the year that they make them. We may talk about this at a later point in the podcast, but they can actually carry forward that second $10,000 contribution to the next year and make $0 of contributions from cash flow, but claim a $10,000 deduction in that next year to be able to still get that tax deduction at the 31% rate. I don't want to get too technical there, but it's a great tool to be able to plan around. And it takes careful planning because you don't necessarily always just want to contribute the maximum every single year. You want to make sure you're keeping cognizant of tax brackets, know where you stand, and what will get you the most bang for your buck.
What would be an example or a reason for someone to contribute to their RRSP, but not using the deduction in the current year and postponing it to, let's say, the next year, the following 2 years?
So a great example of this comes when you're looking to buy your first home and utilize the RSP home buyers plan. So let's say you haven't done any planning up until the point where you're looking to buy your first home and you've got $60,000 saved in a TFSA or a non-registered savings account. Well, what you could do is, as long as you have the RSP room, is you could move that full $60,000 into the RRSP, have it sit there for 90 days, and then withdraw it. And then you'll generate a $60,000 tax deduction. Now, if you're only making, not only, but if you're making $120,000 or $130,000 of income, it may not be wise from a tax perspective to claim that whole $60,000 in 1 year, right? You may not expect to make RSP contributions the next year or the year after. So what you could do is you could claim, let's say, $20,000 of it in that first year, claim another $20,000 in the second year, and claim another $20,000 in the third year. And what that will do is it'll spread out your deductions over 3 years, but it'll generate a higher tax refund each year. And that money is still eligible to be used for the home buyer's plan in the year you withdraw it, even though you haven't claimed the deductions every year. So that would be a great example of when that were to be used. Another example could be that if you're expecting a raise in a year, right, where you're moving up into maybe a vice president position, or you're paying yourself more from your business or something like that in the next year. Well, if you have cash sitting around that you could contribute to an RRSP, you may not want to claim the full thing because maybe you're in a 43% tax bracket today, but next year you'll jump up to a 53% tax bracket. So you make that $20,000 or $30,000 RSP contribution in this year. And then next year, instead of claiming it this year and getting 43% tax refund, you claim it the year after and get a 53% tax refund. And so those are some examples of why you may want to contribute, but may not want to claim it in the current year.
That's brilliant. And also the concept of spreading out over 2 to 3 years is what we talked about the marginal tax rate, where you're basically deducting your income at a higher marginal tax rate than if you would have applied the entire 60, which would bring you to a much lower tax rate. But then your tax refund for each contribution is a lot lower than if you had done it in a higher marginal tax rate.
Exactly.
Awesome. Now, moving on, how is the contribution limit calculated in an RSP? Here's the following. So your RSP room for 2024 was calculated at using your 2023 earned income. So it's 18% times your 2023 earned income. You need to add your unused RSP room. So any room that you had available until that point, you add it to that number. Then you minus the pension adjustments. You need to add your pension adjustment reversal, and then minus your net past service pension adjustment. Now, this is a mouthful here, and we still want to be relevant without losing you, the listener. So we will break this down. I will cover what earned income is, and we'll cover what the pension adjustment means, because we come across those questions often, and it's something people don't know about. How is their pension adjustments impacting their RSP room? So just as a recap, so it's 18% times your previous year's earned income. In 2025, the maximum is going to be $32,490, and your unused contribution room can be carried forward indefinitely. So what is, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, like, just for easy numbers' sake, so if you make $100,000, if you made $100,000 in 2023, then your contribution room generated in 2023 would be $18,000, right? Or 18% of your prior year's earned income. And if you had made any pension contributions in that year as well, they would subtract off of your new room for 2024. So let's say you'd made $10,000 of pension contributions, then your new contribution room would only be $8,000, right? So the $18,000 generated minus the $10,000 of pension adjustments, your new contribution room would only be $8,000 in that current year.
Exactly. What is considered earned income? So it's income from employment, self-employment, and other qualifying sources. So earned income are wages, salaries, bonuses, self-employment income after expenses, rental income after expenses, net research grants, alimony or maintenance payments if taxable. So that's a big one, actually. Self-employment income after expenses. So if you earn $180,000, but you have $60,000 of expenses, your RSP room is generated based on $120,000 income.
Yeah, that's only on self-employed sole proprietor. So if you're incorporated, there's a whole different calculation here. But yeah, like before I started this firm, I was sole proprietor, right? And so I could still deduct expenses, but all my income was still T4A income. So basically, how I would get calculated for RSP room was income minus expenses, and that would be my net income taxable, and then that would generate my RSP room.
Exactly. And then what is non-qualifying income would be investment income from dividends, interest, capital gains. when you're paying yourself a dividend as a business owner, you're not generating yourself RSP room. So that's something to consider. Pension income and employment insurance benefits, so EI benefits. Those are non-qualifying income.
A lot of people don't know that rental income qualifies to build RSP contribution room. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's a good one as well.
Yeah.
And then how do pension adjustments reduce your RSP contribution room? So Sam, do you want to talk about the pension adjustments?
Yeah. So pension adjustments are a bit of a complicated topic, but just trying to simplify it down here. It's essentially the amount that you'll have contributed into your pension plan if you have a pension plan with your employer. Now, this is not a group RRSP. So that's important to note. This is a registered pension plan, either a defined benefit plan like a lot of government employees have, or a defined contribution plan, which are the majority of pensions today. And so if you make a pension contribution, it's made from pre-tax income. And so the income isn't taxable on your T4, but it goes directly into your pension fund. So there's this interesting strategy that you can do, and I'll kind of walk through this here as well. Pension income or pension adjustments are made from your prior year's contributions. So for example, if you contributed $10,000 to your pension plan in 2023, that would affect your pension adjustment for 2024, and it would affect your eligible contribution room to your RRSP for 2024. It wouldn't affect anything for 2023 other than the fact that you contributed to the pension plan in 2023 from pre-tax income. So essentially what happens there is, like I said earlier, if you have an $18,000 RSP contribution room generated from $100,000 worth of income, then in 2024, your new contribution room would be $18,000 minus your $10,000 pension adjustment, which would leave your new RSP contribution room to be $8,000. Now, there's a strategy that some people can use to actually double dip in their first year of participating in a pension plan. This is only available in your first year of participation. And the reason this is available is because your pension contributions only affect your next year's RSP contribution room, not your current year's RSP contribution room. So let's say you're moving it, you switch jobs in 2024, and you looked at your MyCRA balance and saw RSP contribution room of $30,000. And you were like, okay, I've got $30,000 I can put into my RRSP, but you're worried because you're also now starting to contribute to a company pension plan. You don't want to over contribute. Most people make the mistake of saying, well, I'm going to subtract whatever I contribute to my pension plan off of what I'm going to put into my RRSP because I don't want to over contribute. It's actually not necessary. So you can do the full $30,000 of RRSP eligibility for that year, if that's your contribution room, and contribute to your pension at the same time. So let's say you put $10,000 into your pension and $30,000 into your RSP. That's $40,000 of tax deductible or non-taxable income you have now put into a registered plan that you can defer until retirement. And then the pension adjustment doesn't kick in until the next calendar year. And so now in 2025, your new contribution room will be whatever you made in 2024 minus whatever you contributed in 2024 to your pension. So that's how it's calculated, and it offers people the chance to double dip into their RRSPs or double contribute into their RRSPs and defined contribution pension plan in their first year of enrolling into that new plan.
So with that being said, the average tenure of employees in a role used to be about 25 years, but now we've encouraged you to chase a new role in order to double dip. No, that's not what we're saying. Whatsoever. This is an opportunity. I mean, if you want to capitalize on this is like Sam said, this would occur, in your first year of employment where you don't have to worry about over contributing because it will be adjusted the following year, right? And where your RSP room contribution will be adjusted downwards based on your first year of pension adjustments. And just to recap here, your pension adjustments, depending on the plan that you have. So if it's a defined contribution plan, you're looking at the total contributions, the employee contributions and the employer contribution. And usually it's going to be a matching ratio depending on the features and the benefits of your employment contract and the organization that you're with. And those two total contributions, the employee plus the employer, will be part of your pension adjustments, which, as Sam mentioned, will be reducing next year's RSP contribution. But when you look at defined benefit plans, the pension adjustment is actually determined using a formula. And I'm just going to mention it. We're not going to go too much into detail here, but the pension adjustments for defined benefit pension plan is 9 times the annual defined benefit pension benefit 600. Do you want to talk about this formula? I think we should.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. I think it's a bit of a complicated formula for people to try to kind of go and figure this out on their own. This is where financial advice really needs to come into the picture. But ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of people will, especially undefined benefit pension plans, because again, there's a lot of legacy plans with governments and things like that, where they're very generous in their contribution schemes. A lot of them will take up the majority of their RSP contribution room just simply from the pension plans. And sometimes they'll take up all of it. And so you have to be very cognizant of what your pension adjustment is. I don't know if there's a lot of interest in going directly through the formula, because realistically, that's what's going to show up on your T4 is your pension adjustment. And then you make your calculations of the RSP room when you receive your notice of assessment. It'll tell you exactly what you have. So I don't know if there's a lot of value to go through exactly how a pension adjustment on defined benefits calculated. But yeah, if you want to dive into that, feel free.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
First of all, it's good to know for you to understand, of course, what kind of plan you have and ultimately how that's impacting your tax planning possibilities or opportunities as an employee. That's really the takeaway from understanding the features that you have, the benefit features that you have with your work that will help you during your retirement, and then doing everything else that you can outside of your work employment matching programs or defined benefit plans in order to maximize your retirement planning. Yeah, that's the takeaway. So just to recap here, the difference between the pension adjustments and the registered pension plan deduction or RPP. So the RPP reduces your taxable income in the current year, similar to like an RRSP contribution, but although you won't get a tax refund because it was taken pre-tax by your employer, versus the pension adjustments will be reducing your next year's RRSP contribution. Hence why you have that leeway during your first year of employment, where you can both max out your RSP while also maxing out your contribution with your employer.
Great stuff.
How are funds taxed when you withdraw from your RRSP?
Great question. So when you contribute to an RRSP, it's essentially, I like to just simplify it and say you're deferring a part of your salary to a future point in time. And typically the part of your salary you're deferring is the part you can save, right? So if you're making 100,000 and you only need to spend, let's say 60,000 to live on, and you've got an extra 10 or 15,000 that you don't need, well, you can put that in an RSP, and effectively you're deferring part of that $100,000 salary to a future point in time, because you're not actually getting taxed on what you contribute to an RSP. Now, on the back end of that, you're getting taxed when you withdraw the money from the RSP. And this has led to a lot of misconceptions and I think undue animosity towards RRSPs, which I think is unearned, because I do think they are fantastic vehicles. I think one of the reasons is that it's just difficult to contextualize when you're 70 taking money out of an RRSP versus the benefit that you got by putting it in when you were 30. I think that's just a hard thing to conceptualize, that, hey, I got this benefit 30 years later or 30 years ago. So now I'm not frustrated by taking the money out and getting taxed on it. You talk to a lot of seniors, and I've talked to a lot of people in retirement, and they get very frustrated that every dollar they take out of their RRSP is withheld at a 30% marginal tax rate, right? Or 30% withholding tax. And it's constantly having to remind people, yeah, but you got a 43% deduction when you put this money in. So it actually worked well for you. So it is fully taxed as income in the year that you take it out. I think one of the misconceptions, though, or one of the points I'd like to make about RRSPs too, is that our RRSP returns, contrary to what Guillaume said, in my opinion, we can debate this if you want, but they are tax-free in a sense. So I'm gonna walk you through this for a second. So if you contribute $10,000 to an RRSP and you're at a 43% marginal tax rate, what's your tax refund going to be on that?
Wait, 4,300.
Right. So in effect, what did that contribution actually cost you from cash flow? It would be 10,000 minus 4,300, right?
Right. Sure.
Okay. So the contribution actually only cost you $6,700, and now you've got $10,000 in an RRSP. Right? So one mistake that we make is thinking that 4,300 extra that's in the RRSP, because remember, it only costs us $6,700 net cash flow to contribute that 4,300 extra is also our money. It's not. It's the government's money, right? Because we're deferring a part of our salary, right? When we get a raise every year, if we get a 5% raise on $100,000, we don't increase our spending by $5,000. We increase our spending by 5% of our take home, right? If that makes sense. So we understand intrinsically that a part of getting a salary raise means the government gets more tax, right? So a part of our RRSP contribution is the government's money that's being held to defer over a period of time to pay them tax. So we kind of make this misconception where it's like, well, I've got $1 million in my RSP and all $1 million of that's mine. It's robbery that I have to pay it to the government. Well, hold on. You wouldn't have any money in your RRSP, right? You wouldn't have any money in your RRSP, or you would have less money in your TFSA if you'd contribute to that post-tax. And so the argument here is that the money that you actually put in, your net cost to cash flow actually does grow tax-free. That $6,700 actually does grow tax-free, assuming that you're in the same marginal tax rate when you contribute as you are when you retire. So if you're in the exact same marginal tax rate, any growth on that actual net cost of your contribution is returned to you, right? And that's tax-free. The only thing that's taxable is the extra, that $4,300 extra amount that's in there. That part is what goes to the government. So when we look at the numbers and we prorate the growth, let's say on a 5% growth schedule over a 30-year period, what we can see is that the $6,700 compounded at 5% every year is actually what we net out of the RRSP, even though there's $10,000 growing at 5% every year. And so when we look at it from that perspective, the returns on an RRSP are actually tax-free. But if you only look at it from the perspective of I put $10,000 in and now I see 5% growth on that, and that's $10,500. But when I take it back out, I don't get $10,500. I get the net after tax amount. Then yes, it's taxable. But again, I think that when we look at RSPs, we have to look at what it actually cost us to contribute to it, because we do that with TFSAs. We're going to get to this in a second. If we have $10,000 bonus coming our way, I could put all 10 of that in an RSP if I fill out the right forms, but I can't do that if I put it in a TFSA. I can only put, let's say, $700 into that TFSA or $7,000 into that TFSA. When we compare it in those types of ways, it actually makes a lot of sense. And RSPs are actually a fantastic tool to house your investments long-term.
That's fascinating. I actually never heard it from that point of view or that perspective. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. We're going to cover the whole RSP versus TFSA advantages in a second versus the non-reg account. But I think I really like your view of it, or at least the perspective that you took. I will rephrase what I said. I would say then the RSP becomes partially tax deferred and partially tax-free, and then the TFSA is 100% tax-free. Would that be more of an accurate statement from your perspective?
Yeah. The TFSA growth is 100% tax-free. The contributions are taxable, but yes.
Yeah, of course. No, I get that. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, cool. Do you want to talk about a few withdrawals options from the RRSP?
Yeah, so
prior to retirement?
Prior to retirement, there's two main options you can use to withdraw money from your RRSP without paying any immediate tax on it. So one of them is you can withdraw $60,000 to fund the down payment of your first home. And then the year after you purchase, you have to start putting the money back into your RSP. So think about it like a tax-free loan of your own money. And then you have to put in 1/15 of your withdrawal every year over the course of 15 years. And that's how you refund your RRSP. Again, there's some strategies you can work on with this. If you decide not to recontribute to your RSP, then 1/15 of $60,000 becomes taxable every year you owe the money back into your RRSP. So it's not a huge tax hit, but if you continue to climb up the salary band, then you will be paying more in taxes on the amount you withdraw from the RSP than what you got as a tax refund for when you contributed. So keep that in mind. The other option is the lifelong learning plan, where if you decide that you want to go back for post-secondary education, whether it's another trade, whether it's a secondary degree, a master's degree, education of any kind, as long as it's qualified post-secondary, you can withdraw $10,000 a year out of your RRSPs without paying any immediate tax for 2 years, so $20,000 in total. And then you owe that money back when you graduate, when you finish your program. You'll owe the money back the year after over a 10-year span. So you'll have 10 years to recontribute a max of $20,000.
Perfect. And then just mentioning as well that the growth is tax deferred or partially tax free. And then when you withdraw it, the entire amount is being taxed at your tax rate at that point in time. So whether you've earned capital gains, interest, or dividends, it's all going to be taxed at the same progressive tax rates that you will be facing during your retirement. Do you want to talk about the eligibility to take money out of an RRSP when you retire?
Yeah. So, I mean, anyone can take money out of an RSP at any point in time. Just keep in mind that when you do, you'll owe the taxes back on the amount that you're taking out based on your personal marginal tax rate. So we've seen some instances where it could make sense to take money out of an RSP pre-retirement, like if someone's starting a business and they are going a year without earning any income, taking money out of an RRSP is effectively done what an RSP's job is to do, which is I contributed when I was earning a bunch of money and now I'm taking money out when I'm not earning any money. So that's a way where you can kind of contribute at a high tax bracket and withdraw at a low tax bracket. So that's, so you can take money out of an RSP at any point in time. You can also turn your RSP into a RIF at any point in time. There's a bit of a misconception that you have to be like a senior to turn your RSP into a RIF, but no, you don't. You can turn your RSP into a RIF at age 21 if you want to. There aren't very many use cases for that, but you could do that. And then you're required to turn your RSP into a RIF at age 71 and required to take the first withdrawal out of the RSP at age 72, or the RIF at that point in time would be at age 72. And so when that happens, there'll be a forced minimum withdrawal that the government will impose to say at age 72, you'll owe you'll be forced to withdraw 1%. I don't know what the exact numbers are off the top of my head, but 4%. Age 73, it'll be 4.5. Age 74, it'll be 5, right? And every year they require you to withdraw more money out of your RSPs. In some cases, when you have large RSP balances at retirement, it may be worthwhile, especially if you've retired before age 71, it may be worthwhile to start depleting your RSP balances a little bit earlier so you can smooth your tax rate over your retirement. And so in the event of early death, you're not ending up paying a 53.15% tax bill on the entire RSP balance if you're living in a place like Ontario. So there's strategies to do that. One of the more overlooked strategies I find, and again, this is a strong argument against RRSPs, where people say, well, if I pass away early without a spouse or my second spouse passes away, the entire RSP is taxable. And that's true. One of the ways you can hedge against early death is by buying a term life insurance policy when you're healthy, let's say age 45, and basically saying, okay, I know that I want this life insurance policy to continue to age 70, right? Or age 75, because that's when I'm at highest risk of early death. And any time after that, hopefully I'll have my RSPs depleted enough so it won't be a big tax bill if I were to pass away. And you can basically hedge the tax bill by buying that life insurance policy at that point in time. And it'll be at minimal cost, right? Because if you buy it young enough and you're healthy, you'll be able to say, well, I want to fund a $300,000 or $400,000 life insurance policy till age 70, and then I want it to drop off after age 70. It's not going to be very expensive. So things like that are some strategies you can do to mitigate some of the tax risk there too.
Nice. So, and then do you want to talk about the spousal RSP?
Yeah. So the spousal RSP allows the higher earning spouse to deduct their RRSP contributions off of their income, but open an RSP in their spouse's name and put it in their RRSP. So essentially, in my situation, right, where I work full time, my wife's on maternity leave and likely not going back to work, it would make sense for me to open a spousal RRSP for her. And the reason why is mainly because if I wanted to, let's say, retire early at 55 or 60, and there isn't the ability to split income until I'm 65, essentially, if my RSP balance and my wife's RSP balance are at the same amount, then we could withdraw equally and get taxed less. And my wife owns her RSP even though I contributed to it. And so in that sense, it's actually her drawing money out of her RSP, me drawing money out of my RSP. So if I was to need $60,000 of income at age 55, it's much better for me to take 30 out of my RSP and 30 out of my wife's RSP, keeping us at a very low tax bracket, than for me to withdraw all 60 by myself. Now, after age 65, if you're planning on retiring after age 65, there's limited uses because you're able to split income. Some uses still are there because if your spouse is under 65, you can withdraw money from their RRSP still. When you're over 65, even though you can split your income, you can still withdraw from their RRSP. But there's limited use cases after age 65. But before age 65, there's some pretty strong incentive to do it.
I think the key here as well is to make sure that your reducing your own RRSP room, or sorry, you're contributing to a spousal RRSP based on your own RRSP room. It's not like you're using your spouse's RRSP room. So if you have $30,000 of RRSP contribution room for a given year, you can decide to put $15,000 into your own RRSP and $15,000 into your spousal RRSP. It's not like you can put $30,000 in your own RSP and then you have even more room for your spousal. So that's something, maybe a misconception from people that didn't know how spousal RSP worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, talking about the tax-free savings account, that was introduced in 2009. This is an interesting account because it's kind of a Swiss Army knife in a way. It can be used in so many ways. There's so many advantages to it. So we'll talk about it. So how does it work? I mean, you have an annual contribution limit of $7,000. Do you know what the total, if you were born in 2009, was the total? Is it $102,000?
So I think I think, would that be next year? I think next year it'll be 102. So I think right now it's 96,000 or 96.5. I'd have to double check that.
Yeah, something like that. So we'll reach over $102,000 by 2025 in contribution room if you're eligible to contribute. Of course, your contribution, you don't get any tax deductions when you contribute to it because you've done it after tax. So when you withdraw it, you don't pay any taxes at all. Another thing to know about TFSAs is that you can, for example, withdraw your entire amount and you will get that room back the next year. If you compare that to an RRSP, in order to get the room back RRSP, it's based on the formula that we mentioned. You need to have earned income, and then the formula is going to dictate what is going to be your new contribution room for the following year, which is different than the TFSA. The growth, of course, everything is tax-free, whether you're earning capital gains, dividends, or interest. And then the eligibility, you need to be 18 years old and older and have a valid social insurance number to open an account.
Except in BC, it's interesting. So in BC, you actually have to be 19 years of age or older to open an RRSP, but you still get your contribution room for the age 18. You just can't open one until you're 19.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Do you want to talk about the advantages of a TFSA?
You mentioned like the Swiss Army knife of plans. Absolutely. I think, not to get too much into the TFSA versus RRSP debate, because in a good planning situation, the client will be maxing out both, not an either or scenario. But in this situation, TFSAs act as the ability to put money away for retirement with the capacity to withdraw without penalties. You always have to be very careful about doing that, like using your TFSA as a savings account. But the TFSA is a great long-term plan. The growth inside of it is tax-free on the investor's end. There still are some foreign withholding taxes payable on dividend distributions from foreign funds, but they're not directly taxable in terms of Canadian taxable income. So it's a fantastic way for Canadians to, after they've maxed out registered plans or RSPs and things like that, before they look at non-registered plans, to utilize their tax-free savings account. It's also an underutilized retirement and estate planning tool. And one of the things, kind of what we mentioned in our intro, when we're talking about the business side, one of the things that we find people overlook quite a bit is utilizing a TFSA for retirement surpluses. At age 71, you're going to start being required to withdraw a lot more money out of it, your RIFs and pension plans and RSPs. So you might actually be in a situation where you're withdrawing more money than you need. And so what do you do with that surplus? Well, if you fund your TFSA with that surplus and then designate a child as a beneficiary or like an adult beneficiary of that tax-free savings account, you bypass probate and there's no tax owed on that disposition to the next generation. And it's the only account that's like that. The RSP, there's taxes owed. You can bypass probate by naming a beneficiary, but there's still taxes owed to the estate. With the TFSA, if you just basically fund from your retirement surplus, your tax-free savings account, and then say, okay, well, this is the tax-free part of my estate, and this is going to, you can name 2 or 3 beneficiaries on it. This is going to these people. It's a fantastic way to ensure that your estate's growing in a tax-efficient manner and that it's being passed down to the next generation in a cost-efficient manner by bypassing probate as well.
Yeah, very interesting. So now the question is, should you prioritize funding your TFSA or your RSP? Sam, did you know that they could provide the same benefits in some occasions?
I did. In fact, I've written a few articles on this and done a few videos on this, which people have labeled as controversial somehow. I don't know why, because it's just math. It's, yeah, essentially, if you contribute to a TFSA versus RSP, the only way the TFSA is more advantageous, assuming apples to apples investments, is if you are in a higher tax bracket in retirement than when you contribute. If you're in the same or lower tax bracket in retirement, the RRSP either comes out equal to the TFSA or beats the TFSA due to the ability to shift tax brackets from when you contributed versus when you withdrew the money.
Exactly. So that's very well said, Sam. And I'm not surprised that you already know the answer to this question. No, so what you're looking here, if you're looking at this video on YouTube or a short clip, is so we're showing you a table where we compare the non-reg account, the RSP, and the TFSA. And we're looking at three scenarios: the higher tax rate today versus retirement. So if we compare that, then the RSP is going to be more beneficial than your TFSA. But if you look at a tax rate where you're in a lower tax rate today versus your retirement, then funding your TFSA first is going to be more advantageous, and then your RSP second. But like we mentioned, you're going to cap out your TFSA pretty fast. So you'll still be more advantageous to go into RSP than leave it in a non-reg account. And then if the tax rate that you're facing today versus retirement is equal, then it's actually a coin toss, meaning like both accounts are providing you the same benefits. So that's the takeaway.
The fact that it's a coin toss could favor the TFSA because of the flexibility of the account. But the problem is, and this goes both ways, is that we can't accurately predict tax policy in 20 years from now. And so even though historically tax brackets have risen by inflation every year, so basically you have to make more money now to get taxed at a higher rate than you did previously, that doesn't mean that some government couldn't come in and say any income over $110,000 is going to be taxed at 50%, right? So like that is obviously a risk with the RSP, but we're only taking in today's values of that and just projecting it forward to inflation. But it could also go the other way, which a lot of people don't think about, when rates lower. Now, I know maybe the world doesn't seem to be trending that way, but that is something that could happen. So when we look at tax risk, we have to look at it from both sides of the equation of, yes, tax rates could be higher on the same amount of money, inflation adjusted, but they could also be lower. And if they're equal to where we're at today, then the RSP and TFSA are a coin toss in terms of, if I am taxed at 30% today and I'm going to be taxed at 30% retirement. But if the RRSP, if you're taxed at less in retirement than you are today, which is the case of most Canadians, then the RRSP actually comes out ahead of the TFSA in terms of total wealth, after tax total wealth.
And the takeaway as well is that both are going to be superior to a non-reg account.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, so absolutely.
What are some of the mistakes that you're seeing retail investors make with their TFSA, with registered money?
The biggest mistake that comes to mind is people think their TFSA is the gambling account, so they should invest the highest risk in their TFSA. And so what I would say to that is your TFSA is a retirement planning account and it should be used for that purpose. And so the reason being is because the higher the risk of the investment that you're in, the higher the likelihood that you'll lose money. So we have to consider that. It's not just high risk, high reward. It's also high risk, right? Like you actually could lose money. So when we're taking riskier investments, we're doing alternatives or things of that nature or speculative investing, oftentimes we're biased towards the upside to think, but if I get a 1,000x return on this, it's all tax-free, therefore I should do it in my TFSA. Listen, the reality is that you are much more likely to lose money betting on those speculative strategies and gambling in the stock market than you are to grow. And so if we want to look at likely outcomes, not just blindly optimistic outcomes, but likely outcomes, if you're going to gamble, do it in a non-registered account because you can actually deduct your losses, which are very likely to happen. I know no one wants to hear this. I know everyone thinks they're the next great investor, but reality is that you're much more likely to lose money doing this risky betting in investing. So if you're going to do that activity in the account that rewards losing money by creating a tax deduction. And the reason why it's bad to do it in the TFSA is because when you lose money in a TFSA, you lose that contribution room. It's not like if I lose 10,000 in a TFSA, the next year I can recontribute 10,000. That's not how it works. I would have to grow that back in order to regain that contribution room. And so that's simply just not a good strategy to bet on. And the much more likely strategy is that you lose money. So if you want to play that game, do it in a non-registered account. The TFSA room is way too valuable to gamble with. Look at long-term investments that meet the risk tolerance that you're willing to put the majority of your money into and go that direction.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're in that scenario and you can use both your RSP and your TFSA for long-term retirement savings, then you're much better off to be sheltering taxes in the TFSA and growing it at, let's say 7 to 10% a year in a globally diversified portfolio than using it as a savings account earning, 2.5%. And that's what we see often is, those savings accounts, keep that in non-reg or just in a high interest savings account at your bank, but then use it all your room to be invested in a well-diversified portfolio for your long-term retirement goals. The other question that I would like to cover as we near the end of this episode, do you think it is better to leave money in a corporation or max out your RRSP and TFSA?
Yeah. So this is an interesting one. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
So I pulled a research from one of your favorites, Jamie Goldenbeck, and he break it down very well. So I'm just going to summarize it for you here. So as a rule of thumb, when personal tax rates remain constant over time, corporate investments will likely leave you with less in your pocket than an RSP or TFSA. Okay. So for 100% deferred capital gains, corporate investments always yield a greater amount than an RSP and TFSA. So if you can only earn capital gains, then you might be better invested in a corporate investments than RSP and TFSA. But so are the exception to this rule of thumb. However, few investors will likely earn 100% capital gains over a long term, meaning that if you're earning eligible dividends or interest, then you're worse off to keep money in your corporation than you are in paying it out to yourself and maximizing your RSP and TFSA. And that could be a whole episode on corporate investment planning, which I'm sure we're going to cover it.
Yeah. And I guess just to clarify on that too. So the way you can invest your money in an RSP from your corporation, a lot of people don't understand this. But first of all, you have to have RSP room to do this. But let's say you have $50,000 or let's say you have $100,000 sitting in a corporate checking account that you're like, I'm not sure if I should invest this in my corporation and buy stocks and bonds through that, or if I should invest this in an RRSP. A lot of people think, well, if I invested in an RRSP, then I have to claim it as personal income and I get taxed on it, and then I put it in my RRSP. But that's not exactly true. You can essentially do a tax-deferred rollover right into your RRSP from corporate accounts. So let's say you have $50,000 of RRSP contribution room. Then the comparison becomes, am I better off keeping $50,000 in my corporation and investing it? Am I better off transferring this to my RRSP? And you always want to get accountants involved in this conversation. The way we typically do it is when year end rolls around for business owners, we'll look at how much retained earnings they have, or the safe income on hand, which is basically their amount that they have to invest after all taxes, expenses are paid. And we'll do the assessment on how much can go into the RSP and how much should stay into the corporation. And the benefit of it being in the RSP is that you don't actually pay any personal tax on it the year you put it in the RSP, because yes, it's personal income, but then it's moved into the RSP, which is a tax deduction on the exact amount that was paid in personal income. So essentially, it's a tax deferred contribution directly from your corporation into your RRSP. And then the growth on the RRSP isn't taxable in the year that it's earned, right? So you earn interest income, dividend income, you earn capital gains distributions, or you sell or rebalance and earn capital, real capital gains. That's all taxable in the corporation the year that it's earned, but it's not taxable in the RSP. So that's something we call tax drag, in the technical term, where the tax implications of earning interest in a corporation are 50.13% partially refundable. Tax implications of earning eligible dividends are 38%, which is fully refundable in some cases, and of ineligible dividends, which is basically foreign dividends from an investment portfolio, is about 50.13, which is partially refundable. But basically, I've got all of these 38, 50% tax bills from my investment income in my corporation. I don't have any of that in my RRSP. So those tax bills reduce the real rate of return inside your holding company or operating company. That doesn't happen in an RRSP. And so that's why Jamie Gollenbeck in his paper, which we're going to link in the bottom of our show notes, came to the conclusion that holding money in an RRSP is better unless you can get 100% tax deferred capital gains in a corporation, which is next to impossible to get, right? Because you have to find stocks that have never paid out a dividend and never will. And then you couldn't really do that by investing in funds unless it's like corporate class funds, but even some of them have capital gains distributions. So there's just so many technicalities to this that often it's better off just going with the RRSP and then retaining everything else in the corporation and investing through there.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many factors now impacting that decision. Like you said, you're trying to minimize tax drag within a corporation, but then that can bring a whole suite of other things. Like, if 50% of the global stock market don't pay a dividend and you invest in that, then you're missing out on, a massive portion of the investment universe that pays your dividend. That may be great companies as well. So it's like now you're really mixing tax and investment planning together. And sometimes you don't want the tail to wag the dog. Like you need to, I would say, focus maybe on making sure the portfolio is well constructed. And then after that, trying to optimize it from that point on, not necessarily trying to solve for minutiae, which are important. Taxes are important, but they shouldn't supersede the bigger decisions, which usually come at, okay, how are your returns going to be generated and everything that comes with making those investment decisions.
Well said.
Please visit us on mwadvisors.ca. If you want to get in touch, follow us on social, links in the bio. And we're looking forward to posting our next episode next week, which is going to be with the Canadian tax guy, Mohammed, which we're super excited about. And can't wait to hear about his story, his focus, his clientele, and any tax tips and advice that he has for you guys as we're wrapping up 2024 and getting ready for 2025. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode. Okay.